Officer Brad Turner sat in his patrol car, sipping coffee and scanning the quiet suburban street. It was an uneventful evening, just the way he liked it. This neighborhood, mostly wealthy and white, rarely had any trouble. That's why, when he noticed a well-dressed black man standing beside a sleek black Mercedes, his instincts immediately kicked in. Doesn't belong here. With a huff, Turner tossed his coffee into the cup holder, flicked on his lights, and pulled up beside the man. Rolling down his window, he eyed him suspiciously. "Hey, what are you doing around here?" His voice was laced with the authority of someone who is used to never being questioned. The man turned his head slowly, meeting Turner's gaze with an unreadable expression. He was tall, well-groomed, and dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. His posture was calm, controlled, too controlled, Turner thought, as if he wasn't intimidated. "I'm waiting for someone," the man replied evenly. His deep voice was measured, giving nothing away. Turner scoffed. Waiting for someone? In a neighborhood like this? He stepped out of the car, hand resting on his belt. "Let me see some ID." The man didn't move. "Is there a reason you're asking me that?" Turner's jaw tightened. He hated when they questioned him. "Yeah, because I don't recognize you, and I need to make sure you're not up to something." The man let out a slow breath. "Officer, I haven't broken any laws. I have the right to stand here without being harassed." Harassed? That word made Turner's blood boil. He took a step closer, his presence looming. "Listen here," he said, voice low and threatening. "When a cop asks for ID, you hand it over. Unless you've got something to hide." The man remained still, watching him, his eyes unreadable. The lack of fear in his expression irritated Turner. He was used to people scrambling to obey him, not standing firm like this. "Not going to ask again," Turner snapped. The man sighed, reached into his suit pocket, and handed over a leather wallet. Turner snatched it, flipping it open. His eyes barely registered the name before he tossed it back. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" he muttered. Then, in a moment of pure disdain, he spit at the ground near the man's feet. For the first time, the man's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing at his side. But instead of reacting, he simply looked at Turner with an expression that sent an unexpected shiver down the officer's spine. "You're going to regret that," the man said quietly. Turner let out a mocking chuckle. "Oh yeah, and what exactly are you going to do about it?" The man simply smiled, a small, knowing smile. He adjusted his cufflinks, then stepped past Turner and into the car. As he drove off, he left behind an eerie silence. Turner shook his head, chuckling to himself as he returned to his squad car. Just another nobody who thought he could challenge authority. Little did he know, by morning his entire world would be turned upside down. The next morning, Officer Brad Turner strolled into the police station, feeling as confident as ever. Another day, another shift. He grabbed a coffee from the break room and leaned against the counter, chatting with a few colleagues about last night's patrol. "Some guy gave me attitude over in Ridgewood," Turner scoffed. "Black guy in a suit, standing next to a Benz. Thought he was too good to show me his ID." One of the officers chuckled. "Probably some businessman lost in the wrong neighborhood." "Yeah, well, I put him in his place," Turner said with a smirk, taking a long sip of his coffee. Before anyone could respond, the intercom buzzed. "All officers report to the briefing room immediately." Turner frowned but shrugged it off. He followed the others down the hallway, pushing open the doors to the large briefing room. Nearly every officer in the precinct was already there, murmuring among themselves. At the front of the room stood Captain Reynolds, looking more serious than usual. And next to him, Turner's stomach dropped. It was him, the man from last night, the man he had humiliated, the man he had spit at. But now, he wasn't just some guy on the street. He was standing at the podium, exuding the same quiet authority, except this time, every single officer was at attention. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce Chief Anthony Caldwell, your new commanding officer." Silence. Turner felt like the ground had been ripped from under him. "Chief!" His breath quickened. His palms went clammy. Caldwell stepped forward, scanning the room with a calm, knowing expression. "It's an honor to be here," he began. "But let's get one thing straight. I didn't take this job to sit behind a desk." I'm here to make sure this department upholds the values of justice and integrity. Some of you will find that easy. Others, he let the pause hang in the air. Others will need to make some serious adjustments. His eyes landed on Turner. Not for long, not dramatically, but just enough. Just enough to let him know, I remember you. Turner's throat went dry. Caldwell continued. There will be new policies in place. Changes that some of you may not like. But let me be clear, this department will no longer tolerate misconduct, racial profiling, or abuse of power. Murmurs rippled through the room. Turner clenched his jaw. You are officers of the law, Caldwell said. Your job is to protect and serve everyone, not just those you choose to respect. Turner's heart pounded in his chest. This couldn't be happening. The man he had belittled was now his boss. As the meeting wrapped up, Caldwell walked past Turner, pausing just briefly. He lowered his voice. Actions have consequences, Officer Turner. Let's see how you handle yours. Then he walked away, leaving Turner standing there, his world crashing down around him. Officer Brad Turner sat at his desk, staring at the disciplinary notice in his hands. His fingers tightened around the paper as his mind raced. Suspension pending investigation for misconduct. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Just days ago, he had been a respected officer, walking the precinct with confidence. Now, his career was hanging by a thread. All because of one moment, one mistake, one person. Chief Caldwell. Turner gritted his teeth, replaying the encounter in his head. He had treated the man like a common nobody, spat at his feet, humiliated him. And now, Caldwell was in power, handing down consequences. But was this really about justice, or was it revenge? The knock on his door snapped him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Captain Reynolds stepping inside. Turner, Reynolds said, folding his arms. This isn't looking good for you. Turner let out a scoff. Oh, come on, Cap. It was just some street interaction. I didn't do anything. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Didn't do anything? You harassed an innocent man. You disrespected him. Hell, you spit at him. He shook his head. And now that man is your boss? Turner leaned back, crossing his arms. So what? This is payback. No, Reynolds said firmly. This is accountability. Something you've managed to avoid for a long time. The word stung, but Turner didn't let it show. He had always thought of himself as a good cop. Sure, he was tough. Sure, he had his opinions, but he did his job. Wasn't that enough? Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples. The chief is giving you a choice? Turner's ears perked up. A choice? You can take the suspension and risk termination after the investigation, Reynolds said. Or you can go through mandatory racial sensitivity training and serve community hours in the same neighborhoods you've policed. Turner scoffed, shaking his head. Community service? What? You want me handing out food at shelters? Reynolds' gaze hardened. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about punishing you. It's about making you see what you've ignored for years. Turner clenched his jaw. And if I refuse? Reynolds shrugged. Then start packing your locker. Silence stretched between them. For the first time in his career, Turner felt something he wasn't used to, powerless. He had always believed he was untouchable, that his badge gave him authority over anyone. But now, he was the one being judged. With a deep breath, he looked down at the disciplinary notice again. The weight of his choices pressed against his chest. This wasn't just about keeping his job. This was about something bigger. Something he wasn't ready to admit yet. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Fine, he muttered. I'll do it. Reynolds gave a small nod. Good. Report to Chief Caldwell tomorrow morning. He'll have your assignment. As Reynolds walked out, Turner remained seated, staring at his reflection in the darkened computer screen. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if he had been on the wrong side of the law all along. The next morning, Officer Brad Turner sat stiffly in Chief Caldwell's office, his jaw locked as he listened to his new assignment. You'll be spending the next 8 weeks in community outreach, Caldwell said, leaning back in his chair. Working directly with the people you've policed for years. Turner scoffed. So, what? Babysitting troublemakers? Caldwell's eyes darkened. No, you'll be serving the very people you've mistreated. Meeting them, listening to them, Understanding the damage that officers like you have caused, Turner forced himself to stay silent. He wanted to argue, to push back, but deep down he knew it would be useless. He had no power here. Not anymore. 2 days later, Turner found himself outside a rundown community center on the city's east side. Kids played basketball on a cracked court, laughter and shouts filling the air. Mothers carried groceries while elders gathered on benches, chatting. It was a world away from the quiet, manicured neighborhoods he was used to patrolling. A middle-aged black woman in a simple blouse and jeans approached. "Officer Turner?" He nodded. "I'm Deborah," she said, arms crossed. "You'll be working with me. We serve meals, organize programs for at-risk youth, and most importantly, we make sure these kids know they matter." Turner sighed. "Look, I'm just here to do my time." Deborah's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's what I thought." She gestured for him to follow. "Come on." Inside, Turner found himself setting up tables, passing out meals, and, against his better judgment, listening. At first, he kept his distance, but then something unexpected happened. A young boy, no older than 10, tugged at his sleeve. "Hey, officer," the kid said, holding up a basketball. "You play?" Turner almost laughed. He hadn't touched a basketball in years, but something about the boy's hopeful expression made him nod. "Yeah," he said, "I play." Minutes later, Turner was on the court, surrounded by kids who didn't care about his badge or his past. They just wanted to play. For the first time in a long time, Turner felt something strange, human, but the moment of ease didn't last long. As he wiped sweat from his brow, he noticed a woman watching him from a distance. Her eyes were cold, her arms folded tightly across her chest. When he walked over, she didn't move. "You don't remember me, do you?" she said quietly. Turner frowned. "Should I?" Her jaw clenched. "3 years ago, you pulled me over for a broken taillight. My son was in the back seat. You treated us like criminals." Turner's stomach twisted. He didn't remember, but she did, and that's when it hit him. To him, it had been just another routine stop. To her, it had been a moment of fear she'd never forget. For the first time, Turner truly saw the damage he had done, and for the first time, he wondered if he could ever make it right. Officer Brad Turner sat in his car outside the community center, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed the woman's words from the day before, her cold stare, the pain in her voice. "You don't remember me, do you?" He didn't. That was the problem. To him, she had been just another traffic stop. To her, it had been a moment of fear, of humiliation. And how many more people had stories like hers, stories he had been blind to? For the first time in his career, Turner wasn't sure if he was one of the good guys. With a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and walked back into the community center. Deborah was waiting, arms crossed. "Didn't think you'd come back." "Yeah, well," Turner muttered, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Guess I'm full of surprises." She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a group of teens setting up folding chairs. "Good, because we're hosting a town hall tonight. And you're going to listen." The town hall. That evening, the small auditorium filled with community members, young and old, black and white business owners, students, and single parents. The tension in the air was thick, the unspoken divide between the police and the community stretching like a canyon. Chief Caldwell stood at the front of the room. "We're here to talk. No speeches, no excuses. Just voices that need to be heard. One by one." People shared their experiences, stories of fear, injustice, and distrust. A mother spoke about her teenage son being frisked for no reason. A business owner recounted officers ignoring his calls for help. An elderly man described how, despite living in this neighborhood for decades, he was still treated like a stranger by the police. Then the woman from yesterday stood up. Turner's stomach tightened. She looked directly at him. 3 years ago, I was driving home with my son when Officer Turner pulled me over. My taillight was out, I didn't know. But before I could even explain, he treated me like a suspect, ordered me out of the car, hand on his holster. My son, 8 years old, was in the back seat, crying. Her voice wavered. He still remembers that night. And so do I. The room fell silent. Turner swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, he felt something foreign shame. Slowly, he stood. I don't remember that night, he admitted, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean it didn't matter. He met her eyes. I was wrong. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I came into this thinking I was just doing my job. But I see now that I wasn't protecting everyone. I was protecting who I chose to protect. He exhaled. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to change. The room was silent, but something had shifted. For the first time, Turner wasn't just wearing a badge. He was finally seeing the people he was supposed to serve.